Power creep in Guild Wars 2 is getting out of hand. Let me explain this further. First, special shout out to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch, and Patreon. And now let's jump straight in. I have to start with a disclaimer. This is my opinion. You might have a different opinion, so please let me know in the comments. But this is, in my opinion, a quite reasonable take. So let's start with explaining what power creep is. Power creep explains just this growth of overall amount of power your character has. Doesn't matter if it's DPS or healer or support, whatever, over the course of time. So that means with each expansion, with each just cycle of years, we get higher level of efficiency, of agency of our character just over the course of time. I have to admit that power creep is not something that is very new. Guild Wars 2 always had this power creep to some extent, even though we don't get a new level cap, we don't get new best in slot gear, but we had with, for example, End of Dragons, the Shadebot core coming into the game. So even though we didn't have some kind of crazy horizontal progression, we still had a little bit of it because we got a new item, so to say, new slot in our character that actually improves our efficiency to some point. This is just a defensive item, the Shadebot core, but for some classes actually giving more vitality, so more defensive, will also increase the offensive stuff that you get. For example, on Viva you get more offensive stats by converting the vitality. So in a way, that is definitely a power creep. And it makes also content a little bit easier because you're tanking us. So that's the definition of power creep. It got even more when they added relics with Secrets of the Obscure. Because there we decoupled the already quite strong effects of runes, gave them somewhat more stats, but made relics that are then even more potent than the effects of the rune. For the most part at least. And this made it so we get another slot on our character select panel, which then is even better than we had before. So some relics are obviously that come to mind that are extremely crazy, like Sakiro's relic for open world content to just heal, but even just the power DPS relics that give you straight up a 7% power DPS buff, while you also get the rune. Stat increases is actually quite a lot, but you have a lot of relics that actually just help you also in a defensive way. So overall, relics is another way of power creep. But we always had also power creep in general expansion cycle. So starting with Heart of Thorns, we had each expansion giving us new elite specs, sometimes new weapons, depending on what cycle of expansion you're currently looking at. But every time something new came out, and every time it came out, it was definitely better than what we had before. And that's just objectively true for the most part. And that means that it was like not only a top selling point for them, but it's also increasing just the amount of agency, efficiency our characters have after this point, because there was just something stronger. Yes, you can make the argument that they slowly nerfed it down over time to make it so that it's somewhat where it started. But typically the normal cycle would be that we get an expansion and the power creep or the strength of our characters went from 100% before the expansion to, let's say, 130% after the expansion. Something maybe that's a little bit much, but still, yeah. And over the course of time, they nerfed it down, the weapon, the elite specs, to go back to a point, maybe let's say 115%. So we still 15% over what we had before the expansion, even after all the nerfs to it. If you continue that for years, what Guild Wars 2 did with Heart of Thorns, with Path of Fire in particular was crazy. But also End of Dragons, then Secrets of the Obscure, of course, and of course Chant Wilds with the Spear. Every time we got more power creep that got nerfed down a little bit, but in the end we ended up higher than before the expansion. And this obviously is a power creep if we compare that. So it's definitely just objectively true that we have more power now on our characters than we had before, let's say Heart of Thorns for sure. By the way, if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe. What do I also mean? Why is it now getting out of hand? I personally think until now it was, so to say, a little bit kept in check. But if you now look at, for example, the patch that we got previewed, be sure to check out my video that I released a few days ago about the new balance patch coming up on June 24. This balance patch is actually insane. I like the balance patch for the most part, but if you just count the numbers of nerfs, straight up nerfs, I'm not talking about reworks that are considerable nerfs or buffs depending on who you asked. No, the straight up nerfs you can actually count on one, maybe two hands, but that's about it. That's insane. If you have 100 or more changes and only a handful of changes are actually nerfs, then you know the power creep is getting out of hand because they're actually not nerfing stuff down anymore. They just buff underused stuff. And yes, that might be a fun thing to do for the people that just want to play overpowered stuff. But if you just want to look at the game in an objective way, the power creep is getting completely out of hand because of this. GW2 expansion gave us spears and they were absolutely broken. And the nerfs down are not now 20% or something that we had with the previous expansions. After, let's say, the continuous cycle before the next expansion, we have 20% less GW2's power, so to say. No, this is only, let's say, 5% tuned down. And this is insane. This is such a jump in power creep with every, so to say, update. And even the balance patches now buff stuff, not only the expansion release itself. So overall, I think that's a really crazy jump in power creep. You can make an argument that power creep is actually good, because power creep helps new players to get into the game in content that is somewhat difficult, because if you have more power creep, the content gets easier. Just straight up true. But this is also a little bit bad in a way, because you want to keep people learning the game. And if everything is completely easy and it's completely unpunishing, you will not really learn the game. That's my first thing. And the other thing is also, I think you should have a slow learning curve and not something that just gives you over the course of time. You get so much power level from just having all the expansions that it feels like you really have to get everything there to actually get to the power that you need to actually kill a boss. I think it's way more important to actually improve your own skills in the game to actually get to a higher level. So why is power creep bad in my opinion? Because it's not only, so to say, dumbing down the experience for new players in a way that is not healthy. I'm always open for helping new players getting into the game, but just making everything overpowered is not the right way in my opinion. It's okay, it's fun to play, don't get me wrong. I definitely see that. I like to play the most overpowered builds for sure. But it's, in my opinion, it's not the most healthy way, especially if you look at older content, you know. Older content is completely trivial nowadays. Even though we don't have a new level cap, a new best in slot gear, we still trivialize the old content. And that makes it really hard to balance, because that means that you have to get new content out that is either now completely trivial as well, which is not interesting for hardcore player base, or make it really hard with one-shot mechanics with just very high DPS checks, that the casual amount of player base that just didn't learn the game, so to say, with a hardcore mindset or some kind of more experienced and more slowly skilled learning experience, this is not the case anymore. You can't beat this content then, even with the power creep that we have, because you need to have some skill or a decent amount of skill as well to kill those bosses, for example. So overall, I think this is a bad development. The split between the hardcore players and the casual players is getting even bigger because of this power creep, and that's not a good thing. That's a really bad thing in my opinion. And you can also already see that the amount of hardcore players in the game are actually quite a low amount, and you need those players to actually teach how to do mechanics and how to do stuff. And if all of them leave, we have a big problem. So I think we have to have a healthy amount of hardcore and casual community together, and the power creep doesn't help to actually mix those people together. That's my take here. Maybe I'm wrong, let me know your take in the comments down below. But I personally think this is a big problem, and I really hope that they will address it to some extent and make the power creep not too obnoxious and not too crazy. Because I feel like, yes, it is very fun to play a lot of crazy stuff, but balancing new encounters around the power creep is getting even harder because of that, and just the overall amount of balance and how fun the game is and how unique the classes feel is way harder to achieve if you have crazy amounts of power creep in the game. But that's just my take. Like I said, let me know your opinion in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks a lot for watching. Thanks to all my supporters on YouTube, Twitch and Patreon, and I hope to see you all in the next video.